continue. So now wait. So you're number 3. Now, when what was the
there
most?
were only 2 of us when I was number.
You and
I was
Marshall.
the third one hired there, but there was still only the 2 of us working it.
So
at that time.
the Curtis brothers ran it.
Dubé had transferred out. So.
Yeah. Now your brother was working there too. Glenn said your brother was a volunteer.
He was a volunteer. Yeah, Chip. He was a volunteer. When he volunteered, I think from maybe you had to be 16, I think, to volunteer. And as soon as he was 16, he signed up because he was so, he really wanted to be a fireman. So, so we had Chip and Dad. And so when the whistle went off, we only had the 2 paid men. Everything else was volunteers. So when the whistle went off, people would come running from everywhere. The Simpson boys, didn't they work for Brownie? And they would, I can remember, would run.
Your dad, he closed the store, locked the store up to go out.
Well, Dad wouldn't even lock it up because when we were kids, Mom would hear the whistle and she'd say, hurry up. Come on, get ready, we've got to go down to the store because your dad will leave the store open. And Dad would just run, cash register there, everything maybe he would close the door, but he wouldn't lock it. And he would just run to the fire. So everybody, Mr. Simpson, they would all just come out. It was really something. It kind of almost brings tears to my eyes when I think about it, how they left, their livelihood and they left their homes to help their neighbor, right? So it was really, to see it, I can still see it. I was a kid, but I can still see the men running to the fire department or driving in really fast and, getting on the trucks and going.
That was the advantage we had. We just had to run down the road.
Exactly.
We didn't drive.
Yeah, right.
Marshall and I.
Yes.
And then Brownie.
That's right. Yeah,
and,
Marshall would come from.
Bob Young, my other brother-in-law.
Yes.
Lived in the house there for a while also.
Yes, yeah. So we had a fire radio. You probably had a fire radio in the house.
Eventually, and your dad was instrumental in getting that.
Is that right? Yeah.
When we got started on the newer system.
So we had a fire radio in the house, so we could hear all the calls from all the fire departments in the county, right? And when 14 would come, 14 had a certain
they all had
signal.
A certain tone.
Yeah, they had a certain tone,
to
and so we knew it was
night.
14 before they said Company 14, pick up your fire phone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that the way they would call it? Yeah, and we would hear that and we'd say, oh, Dad and Chip will go, and so they would get in the car and run down to the fire department. It was really
originally the dispatchers would ring your telephone. It was a private line, of course, to each fire station. When he rang that phone, it would automatically set the siren off, the house siren, they call it.
Yeah.
And then in the days after we got an ambulance, if they wanted to talk to you, he couldn't call you without getting on the air and say, Company 14, pick up your fire phone. And that way it wouldn't set the siren off.
So
we would pick up the phone and talk to him.
I see.
So which fire do you remember the most? Here in Burke, where you were involved? I know you told me about Fairfax City, but how about Burke? Do you remember a fire here in Burke?
Yeah, there was a big one down on Cohick Glen where South Run exercise, the community center there at South Run. I don't know if you know that. It's on the Parkway now, but it used to be Pohick.
When it was Pohick Road.
When it was Pohick, there was a big fire. That went on for days, I remember.
Oh, we're talking about the brush fire.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
they even had Bill Shades was in on that. Of course, had the equipment in there, and then Bill.
What year was that? You remember? That was not the 1941 one.
No. I was a kid. I was probably 9 or something.
No, but Bill Sheets had contact with Lawton Reformatory and the workhouse, and he even was able to get equipment and
men
trustees running the equipment.
Yes, right.
Up on that fire,
yes.
Long Hose Road, Hose and then Pohick Road.
Yeah.
All in that woods in there.
Why did Bill get involved?
Because he was a forester.
Yeah.
The state
Oh,
He was a state forester.
I remember the
for
So
sign
he
and
could
the
probably
drivers.
get equipment
No,
and men also, but that went on for days. You guys fought that
couple
fire.
days. It was overnight. on that.
Yeah. And the women's auxiliary at the fire department, that my mom was involved in that, and a lot of the women in the community, and they made sandwiches. I think Dad and Mom donated, I guess, the stuff to make sandwiches for the men. So I remember as a kid helping to make the sandwiches, and then my sister and some of the other women in the community delivered it to the men on the front of the lines, fighting the fire. But that was amazing. As a kid, it was an amazing thing, like to see, and hear about this fire and how people came together to support the firemen.
so your mother was with the Women's Auxiliary?
Yes.
She helped form it?
I don't know who formed it.
I never knew.
Yeah.
We never had an organized ladies auxiliary in the early days.
No,
Because
no.
the ladies just automatically got together. They didn't need it all.
Yeah, but then
So it was later on.
Yeah, it was later on.
Because I left work in '67. Later part of '67. That's when I was I went to the warehouse for about a year or so, or something like that. But so it was sometime after that.
And the fire that you remember the most was in Fairfax City, right?
Oh well, no, well, there's a lot of. I sat in church last Sunday and had another flashback, just from the pastor talking about stuff, and I told him all the time.
Well, what was the flashback?
Well, that we won't get into. This one was not a fire, actually. It was a tragic thing about brains and having a brain. But one of the worst incident that I can recall is when the 6 soldiers were electrocuted
Oh, yeah.
on Bridal
Oh, the soldiers. June 1st. Was
Parade.
it?
June 1st, 1967.
Yeah. Those soldiers were putting up a flagpole.
They had the flagpole in the ground. They got away from them and fell across 7,200 volt power line, and it laid there. It was still there. And we got there, Annandale, of course. It was Annandale's first due, actually, and we were right at borderline fire called. We were all dispatched. Because the man calling it in was a fire marshal that was calling it in, and we heard him when he was calling it. And so they sent several companies, and when we got there, that pole was still in the ground, water in the ground, water in ruts around in that little bit of a field, and the pole was still laying across the power line. And we happened to have a piece of line, like it looked like an old clothesline, the old days.
Yeah, I remember.
Quarter clothesline, not as big as a pencil, but whatever. It was non-conductive material and made for such purposes. And we were able to throw that across the pole and back underneath, and then grab a hold of it and gave a yank on the pole to bring it down. Because we had fire in the field, a little bit, it was real wet and all that, but there was old broom sage field, and some of that was burning, and the uniforms were smoldering, and so forth. Guys, they were all laying right at the base of the pole. 18 to 22 years old.
Oh.
Recruits, so to speak. Some were, because one, I think there was one was a specialist, I think, but they were mostly privates. And, from Fort Belvoir Engineering School, Army.